KSAP Beats.
All right, let's get wired in. Another episode of Wired In with Apavelli. And I am excited. I'm really excited. This has been a great week for developers in general, but more specifically, hardcore Microsoft developers. Developers who love to develop Windows apps or even Android or iOS, but mainly Microsoft developers, because this week was the Surface event where two big announcements were made. The Surface Neo, Surface Duo. Surface Duo is a foldable phone that runs the Android operating system, and the Surface Neo is a Surface foldable device that runs Windows 10X, which is built on top of Windows core operating system. And with Windows 10X, there will no longer be any live tiles, just more a simplified look, which I think is fine. But what I like about these devices is you can drag and drop from one screen to another. You can watch a video on one screen and type in write an email on another screen. I think it's really innovative, and I think it's different from other foldable Android devices that we've seen from Huawei, and I think Samsung did one too. Yeah, I think Samsung has a foldable Android device. But the big shock was Microsoft releasing a phone running the Android operating system. A lot of hardcore Microsoft enthusiasts, such as myself, we miss Windows Phone. We enjoy Windows Phone. I can speak. A lot of us still prefer Windows Phone over iOS and Android operating systems. And the hardware was top notch. And I think Microsoft, this is their way of, okay, we didn't have a successful phone with our own operating system, so we'll make hardware and we'll use Android. And you can see Microsoft is really, they're more willing to work with Android. They have apps on iOS, but because Android is more open, it allows them to do more. I mean, you pretty much now can just call it Windroid. That's what you really could call this device. It's a Windroid, but Windroid. That'd actually be pretty cool if they create a joint operating system and where you can run Windows and Android or something like that, or that'd be cool. But the Duo and the Neo looks really great. Too bad we won't be able to get it this year. It won't be available till holiday season next year. But I'm glad they announced it, fourth quarter this year, because that gives developers a chance to scale their apps to run on these devices. And then I know we'll hear more the next couple months. Yeah, the next couple months we'll hear more. But I think we'll really hear more about this at the Build conference, because the Surface event was more catered to consumers. So I think we'll hear more for developers at the Build conference next year. But I think it's a great time to, if you haven't already, start writing UWP applications, because with Windows 10X, it's going to run on newer devices. So Microsoft is not ditching UWP. like some of the sites have indicated, that Microsoft no longer needs UWP. They're reverting back to Win32. Well, when you think about it, all they did was decouple UWP features and implemented them in WinForms and WPF with XAML islands, and allow legacy desktop applications to have certain modern features. So I believe now with the Surface Neo and other devices that they'll release in the future, especially augmented reality devices like the HoloLens 2, I feel like they'll add more features to UWP, and which is pretty much Win UI. And I think UWP will continue to evolve. Now, when people say UWP is dead, I think they say that because Windows Phone is dead. So a lot of people still equate UWP to just Windows Phone, and I think that was the idea to attract developers. That was their strategy, was to say, hey, we're going to build a universal Windows platform where you can run on the phone, tablet, PC, Xbox, HoloLens. But that didn't work. So now UWP has just evolved. It's not just about the phone. It never really was about the phone, but I think that was their main selling point of UWP back in 2014, 2015. I think it was 2015 when UWP first arrived. And now I feel like with more devices, Xbox, Surface, laptops, UWP is going to expand, and it's going to evolve. And if you're a developer developing UWP apps, I think the future is bright. I'm an optimist. I'm not going to get on a bandwagon. If you listen to my previous episodes about UWP, I've been very critical about some journalists that I respect. I respectfully disagreed with a lot of journalists that said UWP is dead or it's not the focus. Even you look at Windows, I think Windows is not really the primary focus, and that was made clear at Build last year. It's all about Microsoft 365. You're a 365 developer, or you can still be a Windows 10 developer. You can call yourself a Windows 10X developer, but Microsoft 365, I think that's where they're gearing towards apps and services. And they're looking, and you look at Microsoft Graph, that provides an API for you to interact with Office 365, SharePoint, Outlook, OneDrive. You can just integrate that into your app. It's just a REST API, so you can integrate these services in your application. So it's not just about Windows. And you look at the Surface Duo, it's not just about Windows anymore. They're embracing Android operating system. Now, a couple questions. So, how will Microsoft developers, write apps to run on Duo, on dual screens? Well, I think Xamarin and Uno platforms will do a great job making sure that it happens. I'm really curious about the Uno platform. I'm really interested in creating a couple apps on top of the Uno platform, just to see what it's like and see the whole process. I'm really excited about the Uno platform. I know they have a conference coming up really soon. I won't be able to attend, but one of these days I got to get to these conferences. That's my goal. My goal is to attend some of these conferences, events, meet other developers. I would like to talk to other passionate Microsoft developers. But the Surface Duo, what if in the future, because we know to develop Android apps natively without a framework, you could use Java or Swift, or if you want to use a cross-platform tool like Xamarin to build Android apps, you can. But let's say in the future, Microsoft and Android, they work together where you have one code base and it's easy to convert your an app that you created for a Surface Neo, let's say a UWP app, and you can easily port that to Surface Duo. I think that's going to happen in the future. Maybe a couple years, maybe not anytime soon, obviously. And you'll just have one code base for this foldable device where your app will run on the Neo, and then you can scale it to run on Duo from one code base. Now, maybe a platform like Uno or Xamarin will help you achieve this. But I think in the future, that's what's going to happen. And the more Microsoft maybe open up Windows to Android, I think there may be some benefit for developers because they may create tools to make it easier to run apps. And let's say they have a deal where you can download a Windows app from the Google Play Store, or you can download Android apps from the Microsoft Store. I mean, I don't know, or they just create like a universal store where you can download Android and Microsoft apps. That'd be pretty cool. I could see that in the future. But this is just me speculating. I don't know if this will ever happen, but with the announcements that were made, was it Monday or Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday. It has me thinking about the future. And I'm already looking at some of the apps that I have and how I can scale these apps to run on the Surface Neo. Now, the Surface Duo, that's going to be interesting because a lot of my Android apps are written in Java. I don't use Xamarin. The reason why I don't use Xamarin because I know the Java language so well, and so I just use what I know. And Java and C#, they're different, but they're very similar. If you learn Java, it's easy to learn C#. If you learn C#, it's not hard to learn Java. But I'm thinking about changing my strategy and using either Xamarin or Uno to really build apps for Android and Windows 10X. Because I think in the future, I think these two operating systems are going to merge together and be Windroid. That's just my opinion. But yeah, I think if you're a developer, I think you should not neglect UWP. And there are a lot of great developers out there that have cool UWP apps, and they're not going anywhere. You gotta think iOS and Android markets are still pretty crowded. I mean, all the stores you can see are pretty crowded, but if you stick with UWP, like I said, I'm an optimist. I feel like eventually it's going to pay off because Microsoft, UWP isn't going anywhere. Just put it that way. UWP isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Now, they might rename UWP. They may rebrand it, but it's probably going to be the same concept, but just change the name. And I think they kind of should change the name just so it can get rid of the confusion of what UWP is. I mean, the documentation does a great job describing UWP, and many still don't get it. I'm talking about from a high level point of view, what UWP is and what it means. People still don't get it. But I'm really excited. When I saw, I wasn't expecting Microsoft to release a phone, to showcase a phone running Android operating system. Now, when you really think about it, if you're an Android user, you can kind of turn your phone into a Microsoft phone, not a Windows phone, but a Microsoft phone, because you can install the launcher, you can run Microsoft apps. You can basically, with Samsung, you'll be able to, it'll be really, you can use the Your Phone app to integrate with your PC, but I think more and more we're going to see Windows and Android pretty much. Whatever I do on my desktop, I can continue on my phone, and you see that with them partnering with Samsung. So Microsoft and Android is going to be a really interesting partnership. I never thought I would see the day Microsoft would partner with Google and Android. That's different. So if you're a developer, C Sharp, or even JavaScript for that matter, you can build apps for the Surface or the Neo. It's like I said, if you use Xamarin, it's probably your best bet to use. I guess you could use one code base using Xamarin if you want to build for the Neo and Duo. I guess you could do that, but the only thing is, because of different technologies, with the dual screen, they have to make sure that it's compatible. Like, so, yeah. Now I'm thinking, so if you're doing something on a dual screen on an Android phone, how can you make that compatible with the Surface? So they're going to have to write, there's going to have to be some API or something to translate that bytecode to that device so you can run on dual screens, which I think they'll figure it out. Yeah, I think they'll figure that out. But I'm excited. I'm really excited, and a lot of developers are excited. This has been getting a lot of good feedback. Now you do have the pessimists. They feel like Microsoft is just giving up on Windows. It's a slap in the face. I've read stuff on forums where people were not really happy. They're not really happy with the new Microsoft. Well, I can kind of understand, but I feel like Microsoft, they're just evolving. They can't be the same company that they were in the 90s and in the 2000s. Times have changed, and with them being more open source, more open to other operating systems, other platforms, it makes it easier for developers and consumers, which I think is smart on Microsoft's part to not be so stubborn and say, we're Microsoft, we're going to stay stuck, because if you do that, they might not be around too much longer. So I know a lot of developers, they have a lot of ideas of what kind of apps they want to create for these devices, but I'm really curious to see frameworks that will be used to build apps to run on dual screens. The APIs, I know Microsoft are going to probably release some APIs. I'll say maybe next year sometime, maybe around build. But we have plenty of time to plan and scale and get our applications ready to work on dual screens. I have a lot of UWP apps that I could add more features to run on dual screens, and I think that'd be awesome. But now with the Surface Duo, it's not a Windows phone. A lot of people are thinking, it's not a Windows phone. It's still an Android phone. It's just Microsoft created the device to run the Android operating system. So I think this will probably be the best Android phone, because Microsoft Surface hardware, is pretty good. So just Android right on top of it is, I think it's going to be a really good phone. I think it's going to be really different, and I think Microsoft, this is their way of getting back into mobile. They're going to create the hardware, and they're going to run operating systems, probably Android, unless another company create an operating system that can compete with Android and iOS. But you won't see this with Apple because iOS is closed, so they make all the hardware operating system. So that's why Microsoft is really investing in the Android ecosystem, because it's easier to customize. And like I said, you want a little preview, if you want to know what it's like to run a Microsoft device, I guess, download the launcher. Use Microsoft apps. I disabled all my Google apps on my Android tablet and my phone, and it gives me the Microsoft experience. I just use the launcher, Microsoft News app, where I use the Office apps. I subscribe to Office 365. I mainly subscribe just because I need the OneDrive storage. Whatever I do is in sync with my PC, so it kind of feels like Windows Phone from that aspect, but it's the closest thing you're going to get. Now, if you like iPhone, that's all preference. Now I'm just rambling about which phones are better. Now, I'm not saying Android is better than iOS. I don't really care. I think they're both great. It just depends on the individual. But if you want more customization, more, I guess you could say more freedom, Android is the better operating system. I think iOS is more catered to people who pretty much are just very simple and they don't really care about launchers and just customizing their phone. iOS is for you then. But I really want to know your thoughts. If you can leave your thoughts, I guess you can follow me on Twitter. That's the best way, at Apavelli. You can follow me on Instagram at Apavelli. You can go to my company website, pragmaticdevsolutions.com, or you can leave a comment in the review section. If you leave a comment, if you listen to this on Apple Podcasts and you leave a review or you have a question, I'll answer the question. Or you can just reach out on social media, and if there's a topic you want me to talk about or a framework you want me to talk about, we'll talk about it. I think, though, I'm going to really focus more on Microsoft and maybe Java frameworks, because that's really my background. And you have a lot of people doing podcasts on like JavaScript, which is really popular, or Python. And you do have individuals who talk about Windows, but I don't think they really go in depth with Well, no, I take that back. You have a couple Microsoft-based podcasts, but I think we need more, because we have a lot of podcasts that talks about Angular, React, Python, and I love those languages too. Languages and frameworks. But I want to talk about things that I'm interested in and give you a different perspective, especially from the Microsoft and even Java. And I know Java is, washed and people don't like it, but Java is evolving in its own little way. There are some awesome frameworks in the enterprise, which I have experience in, and I want to talk about that. I just have to really put together write some good code samples to really demonstrate these technologies. And I'm learning as I do the podcast, as I always say. So that's it for this episode. Please rate the podcast. If you're able to rate the podcast 5 stars on other platforms, please help to support the podcast. Share the podcast on your social media platforms. Give me feedback, what you want to hear about. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, you can reach out at Apavelli on Twitter, at Apavelli on Instagram. I would love for other developers, even consumers, to be on the podcast and give their perspective on certain topics or certain technology. Please. And that's it for this episode. So I'm going to go write some code. So stay wired in, and I am out.